So after 10 years of podcasting, I've been fortunate enough that after about 350 some guests on my show, most of which are in person, some of them felt the need to stick around after the recording was done and did not run away in fear. Some of those even signed the records that I own of theirs. Here are 6 of them. I'm Jason Klom, and this is Comedy on Vinyl. So as you can imagine, as somebody who's obsessed with comedy on vinyl, I have amassed a sizable collection. And whenever I interview somebody who has made a record that I own, especially if it's one that I love, and I meet them in person, sometimes, they've been phone interviews, like if I'd have had Harry Shearer or Tommy Chong in person, absolutely would have had them sign a Credibility Gapper or a Cheech and Chong record. So when the good fortune arises that I get to interview somebody whose record I own on vinyl, I always have them sign them. And one of the first people to do so, and the only person to have signed more than one, is our first record. That's right, Waiting for the Electrician or Someone Like Him by the Firesign Theater, signed by my good pal Phil Proctor. Phil Proctor, of course, one of the founding members of the Firesign Theater. He's signed a few of my records, but this, I think, is the first one. As you can see, he's kindly personalized it for me. He does that every time he signs one of my records. It is an absolute joy whenever he does. The Firesign Theater are a group that I didn't grow up listening to. My best friend Dan did, who had introduced me to all these other records. And when he first played for me one of their records, I was like, I don't get this, I don't understand it. And it took finally meeting Phil Proctor and listening to their catalog to realize, oh crap, I was really missing out. So I have since become quite a big fan. And Waiting for the Electrician is phenomenal. It's their first effort, and good God, I mean, for a first record, it's really hard to beat. Waiting for the Electrician is from 1968. It is, like most of their albums, almost impossible to explain or define. It's sketch comedy, but it's also rooted in improv. It's also rooted in theater in general. They're playwrights and they are actors. Phil Proctor's still an actor. He still acts all the time on stage and otherwise. So their roots are interesting. A lot of what they did was to pastiche radio plays, which is something they grew up with, which is a pretty common thread in certain comedy groups of that generation. It's also why there's so many sketch groups of that generation, I think, is just because of radio. Theater of the mind. If you want a rough basis, that's where it is. But the albums do get, for lack of a better word, very psychedelic. And, eventually just one long track just melding into the other. I remember growing up and thinking, wouldn't it be fun to do a comedy record the way that Pink Floyd did and make it all one track and it all meanders in? And then eventually, had I just listened to Dan and listened to the Firesign Theater, I would have realized, oh, that's what they've already done, and it's genius. Some of it is rooted in improv, which I find surprising, given the quality of it. And I say that as an improviser. Honestly, one of the greater improvisers on stage, period, is a stand-up, and is the subject of our next record. So not the subject of our next record, he created our next record, Sprezzatura. Jimmy Pardo, who is one of my favorite guests of all time, the Podfather, if you want to call him the Podfather, one of the originators of the podcast form. Sprezzatura, like all of his other records, is predominantly crowd work. Jimmy's got jokes, and they're Jimmy has jokes ready to go, but holy cow, put him in front of an audience that has a good energy. Even if they don't have a good energy, he manages to twist them around and bring them into his words and things. Honestly, even if they don't have a good energy, Jimmy Pardo knows how to make it work. I've been in rooms where maybe the audience liked him. I've been in rooms where maybe the energy just wasn't up to snuff yet, and Jimmy brings it to where it needs to be to get the laughs. And I don't know, he's just remarkable to watch and to listen to. And it's crazy to me how many albums he technically could do, because every night is different. But these are the ones that get picked, and good God, they're just nice. They are snapshots of a performance because they're necessary. So it's like when you listen to a Jimmy Pardo record, it's not you're listening to what he's been working on for the year necessarily, or the last few years, whatever. It's what he did that night. You're lucky they recorded it, and that's it. So honestly, give Sprezzatura a listen. Give any of his records a listen, but that one is definitely on vinyl. And Jimmy was kind enough to sign it. One of the fun things about knowing Jimmy Pardo is he has let me volunteer at the Podcastathon for the last 3 years, I believe. And the nuts thing about all this is that I think I discovered Jimmy Pardo on a podcast. Like, I didn't discover him through the normal ways you might, like maybe seeing his Comedy Central special or seeing anything else. I discovered him through a podcast, which is exactly how I discovered the artist behind our next record. Now, this one is a special one. It is a flexi disc. I have a signed flexi disc. It is currently signed by 2 of the 4 members of Super Ego. They are a podcast, but, you know, they're improv sketch group. Some of the best sound design in podcasting, thanks to the group. Matt Gorley and Mark McConville both signed this record for me while they were recording some parts for my next comedy album, which will be coming out in as soon as physically possible. But they signed this. So this is M by Matt Gorley and Jeremy Carter improvising a sketch where Matt Gorley plays M and Jeremy Carter plays James Bond. That's really all you need to know, except that the whole bit is that M wants to know how British he is. And that's the basis of the whole sketch, and I love it. I absolutely love it. And I had to have them sign it eventually. One of my favorite parts is as Matt Gorley was signing it, I was like, oh, just make sure you don't sign on the grooves. And that was right as he had signed on the grooves. It'll still play, but Matt Gorley, being the nice gentleman he was, felt very bad about it. But Matt, you don't need to feel bad about it. He's created one of the funniest podcasts and the best sound design podcast there probably is. Now, speaking of sound design, segue, let's talk about a TV show with some of the best sound design. That's right, Bob's Burgers, the Bob's Burgers music album. I have an inner sleeve signed by Lauren Bouchard because you can't really frame the full thing. It's a big old chunky box set, so I had him sign one of the sleeves. It's also signed by Brian Husky, who is the voice of Rudy. So regular size Rudy. I believe pocket size Rudy as well, and Rudy's dad. But so I have that signed. It's the weirdest looking one in my collection because it doesn't look like anything. It's just a green sleeve, but it's the one that looked like it would best take a Sharpie. I just love Bob's Burgers. Lauren Bouchard was just very kind to sit down and talk with me one day and give me the box set and kindly agreed to sign this inner sleeve, which seemed like the best option. Now, it is a box set, like I said. It is 3 records. They're the colors of lettuce, mustard, and ketchup or tomato. And it is a great box set and just honestly a real celebration of all the wonderful music that goes into the making of Bob's Burgers. And I absolutely love it. And it was very kind of him to sign it. What I really love about my collection of signed records is the variety. I've got some newer comedians. And obviously I already spoke about Phil Proctor, an absolute comedy legend. There are 2 more on this list, the first of which is our next record. That's right, Rusty Warren's Knockers Up. Now, if you don't know Rusty Warren, I just listen to Knockers Up. Her records, if you listen to them, they sort of repeat, a good chunk from the previous record, but there's always something new on them. Feminist comic, she would never have branded herself that way. It was just more she wanted housewives to be able to listen to some other woman saying dirty things, and they weren't that dirty. It was just literally talking about sexuality and being a sexual person, and a lot of it is musical, a lot of it is crowd work. And if you're not charmed by Rusty Warren, then I don't get you. I can understand if it might not be your thing, but her charm is unavoidable. She's incredibly charming. It was kind enough. She sat down with Mike Warden and I, and we interviewed her for 2 or 3 hours, cut that down to a couple of episodes, and she couldn't have been nicer and said some of the nicest things anybody's ever said to me as an interviewer. And meant a great deal to me, and it was obviously extra kind of her to sign the record. I've only met a few of these comedy icons in person. Again, she is a legend. You need to check out her stuff. There's one record I have, though, that is not only signed by a comedy legend, it's also signed by somebody who's played that comedy legend in a film. That's our next record. Bob Newhart Faces, Bob Newhart Faces, Bob Newhart is not a record you have probably even ever heard of or even think about, but I figured it was the most appropriate. I interviewed Bob Newhart's son, Robert Newhart, a few years before I ever got to see Bob Newhart live. And Rob Newhart was very kind. He played his dad for about a 10-second chunk in the movie Heart and Souls, which is a Robert Downey Jr. movie that is where he is visited by these people who died in a bus crash. And they need him to help him work out their unfinished business. It's a cute movie. I think it's a great movie. At least that's what my memory is. And then there's a moment when Robert Downey Jr., his kid version, runs through the Purple Onion and the club, and Bob Newhart's on stage, and he's being played by Rob Newhart. And so we talked quite a bit about that, about him performing and having to memorize his dad's bits. Now, those bits were not from this record, but this record is the first record to be released after Rob is born, and he's mentioned on it. I did see Bob Newhart live and gave the record to a stagehand. Didn't get to meet Bob, but he was kind enough to sign it, give it back, and so it is now signed by the two of them. And the idea of Bob Newhart facing Rob Newhart, who played Bob Newhart, is kind of perfect. And it is a very funny record. It is just not one of the classics people necessarily talk about, but it's more the story behind the signature that I have that one framed. So I have other records that were signed, but some of them are by people I have met that I could talk about eventually. But I also have a bunch that are signed that I bought that way, that I've double checked are actually signed by the real people, or in some cases are signed by people who weren't famous enough for that to be a big deal. They signed all their records, but it might be an exploration, a way to get into some records you probably haven't heard of, or maybe you've seen and haven't picked up. So we'll be talking about those eventually down the line as well. So I thank you so much for watching the show. Please check us out at Comedy on Vinyl on Twitter and Instagram, and /Comedy on Vinyl on Facebook. If you go to patreon.com/stolendress, you can see video episodes of the regular audio podcast I do, as well as you can join up and see video episodes of other shows that I do, including Dispatches from Fort Awesome, which is about the TV show News Radio, Dan and Jay's Comedy Hour, where I talk about my own sketch comedy with my best friend, going back 30 years, 25, roughly 30 years. And there's a ton of other shows that you can listen to as well. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. And if you want to be reminded about the shows coming out, please hit the bell. That always helps. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, have a good thing. Stolen Dress Entertainment.
Hey, it's my turn. Ah!